In 1943, a hospital caught fire. 200 patients trapped inside. Doctors fled. But one black nurse ran back in, again and again. She saved countless lives that night. History gave the credit to someone else. Her name was buried. Until now. This is the story they didn't want you to know. If you believe forgotten heroes deserve to be remembered, stay until the end. Drop a comment with the word hero if you think her story matters. And hit subscribe, because every week we uncover the truth they tried to erase. There's a photograph gathering dust in a hospital archive. It shows a black woman in a nurse's uniform standing among the rubble of a burnt building. Her face is tired but dignified. Her uniform is stained with soot and blood. On the back of the photograph, someone wrote a date. March 15th, 1943. Nothing else. No name. No explanation. Just a ghost frozen in time, a witness to something extraordinary that the world chose to forget. For decades, this photograph sat in a box, unlabeled and unnoticed. When a researcher finally discovered it in 2019, she asked the question that would unravel everything. Who was this woman? Why was her name erased? And what happened on that March night in 1943 that someone wanted buried? The answer reveals one of the most shameful chapters in American medical history. It's a story about courage in the face of flames, about heroism that went unrewarded, and about a system so determined to maintain its racial hierarchy that it would rather lie than give credit where credit was due. This is the story of Ruth Caldwell, a black nurse who saved hundreds of lives, only to have history steal her name. But before we meet Ruth, we need to understand the world she lived in. In the 1940s, America, hospitals were segregated. Black patients were treated in separate wards, often in basements or back buildings. Black nurses were paid half of what white nurses earned for doing the same work. They used separate entrances, ate in separate cafeterias, and were forbidden from supervising white staff, no matter how experienced or skilled they were. The medical establishment viewed black healthcare workers as inferior, suited only for the most menial tasks. Their contributions were minimized, their achievements ignored, and their names systematically erased from official records. This was the world Ruth Caldwell was born into in 1915, in rural Georgia. Her parents were sharecroppers who owned nothing but debt and dreams. Ruth was the youngest of 6 children, and from an early age, she knew she wanted to be a nurse. She would care for her younger cousins when they were sick, fashioning bandages from old cloth and learning remedies from her grandmother. Her family thought it was a sweet dream, nothing more. Black girls from sharecropper families didn't become nurses. The doors were closed, locked, and guarded. But Ruth wasn't the kind of person who accepted closed doors. After finishing high school, a rare achievement in itself, she worked 3 jobs for 5 years. She cleaned houses, picked cotton, and worked nights at a laundry facility. Every penny she saved went into a jar hidden under her bed. She was saving for nursing school, even though only a handful of institutions in the entire country would accept black students. The odds were impossible. Her family begged her to be realistic. But Ruth had made up her mind. Some people are born with a calling so strong that nothing can silence it. In 1938, Ruth was accepted to one of the few black nursing colleges in the South. For 3 years, she studied harder than anyone around her. She learned anatomy, pharmacology, patient care, and surgical procedures. She graduated at the top of her class in 1941, earning her registered nurse certification. She was 26 years old, and she had done what everyone said was impossible. But the celebrations were short-lived. Now came the hard part, finding work in a system that didn't want her. Ruth was hired at Mercy General Hospital, a large segregated facility where black nurses were tolerated but never respected. She was paid $15 a week, half of what white nurses earned. She was assigned to the colored ward, where she cared for patients that white nurses refused to touch. She worked double shifts, slept in basement quarters, and entered through the back door marked colored staff only. When she saved a patient's life with quick thinking, the white doctor on duty took the credit. When she noticed a dangerous drug interaction that could have killed someone, her warning was dismissed until a white nurse repeated it. Despite all of this, Ruth was exceptional. Patients asked for her by name. Families requested her specifically because they knew their loved ones would receive real care, not just medical treatment, but genuine compassion. Ruth had a gift. She could calm a panicked patient with a touch, sense a complication before it showed up in vital signs, and work with a precision that came from both skill and dedication. But none of this appeared in any official record. The hospital logs credited white nurses and doctors for her work. Ruth Caldwell was invisible, just another unnamed black face in a system built to keep her that way. Then came the night that changed everything. March 15th, 1943. It was a Monday, cold and quiet. Ruth was on night duty along with two other black nurses, Lorraine and Betty. The three of them were responsible for nearly 80 patients across 2 floors. It was exhausting work. But they managed. Ruth had just finished checking on a patient in room 347 when she smelled smoke. At first, it was faint, barely noticeable, but within seconds, it grew stronger. Ruth ran to the stairwell and looked up. Thick black smoke was pouring down from the 3rd floor. Her heart stopped. She ran to the nursing station and pulled the fire alarm. The sound shattered the quiet night, sending waves of panic through the building. Patients began screaming. Nurses ran into hallways, and chaos erupted. The fire had started in an electrical closet on the 3rd floor and was spreading fast. Mercy General was an old building with wooden floors and poor ventilation. Fire moved through it like water through paper. Within minutes, the 3rd floor was engulfed. The hospital held 200 patients that night. Many of them were bedridden, unable to walk. Some were elderly. Others had just come out of surgery. They couldn't evacuate themselves. The white staff moved quickly to save themselves. The head doctor, a man named Dr. Howard Preston, made an announcement that would haunt the night forever. Save who you can. Abandon the rest. He meant it. He evacuated the white staff and the patients closest to the exits, then left the building. Other white nurses followed. Within 20 minutes of the fire starting, most of the white staff had fled, leaving behind those too sick or too slow to escape. But Ruth didn't run. Neither did Lorraine or Betty. They looked at each other in that smoke-filled hallway, and without saying a word, they made a choice. They ran toward the fire. Ruth started on the 2nd floor, going room to room. She carried patients who couldn't walk, supporting their weight as she guided them down the stairs. She wrapped wet sheets around patients' faces so they could breathe through the smoke. When the elevators stopped working, she organized a human chain of volunteers, orderlies, and visitors who had stayed behind. They passed patients down the stairs, one by one, hand to hand. Ruth's voice cut through the chaos, calm and clear, directing people, keeping them focused. Lorraine and Betty worked just as hard. Lorraine carried a blind woman down 3 flights of stairs, while Betty stayed on the 3rd floor, the most dangerous area, searching rooms that others had abandoned. The heat was unbearable. The smoke was so thick they could barely see. Their uniforms were soaked with sweat and water from sprinklers that did little to stop the blaze. But they didn't stop. Ruth went back in 17 times. 17 times, she climbed those stairs into smoke and heat, and crumbling structure. On her 12th trip, she found a white doctor frozen in fear, unable to move. His name was Dr. Preston, the same man who had ordered everyone to abandon the patients. Ruth grabbed him, shook him out of his shock, and pulled him down the stairs to safety. He didn't thank her. He barely looked at her. But she had saved his life. By the time the fire department arrived, the 4th floor had collapsed. The building was nearly destroyed, but the casualties were far lower than anyone expected. Of the 200 patients in the hospital that night, more than 180 were saved. It was a miracle, the newspapers would say. A miracle performed by Ruth Caldwell, Lorraine, and Betty. Except that's not what the newspapers said at all. The next morning, Ruth, Lorraine, and Betty were sent home. They were exhausted, burned, and injured. Ruth had second-degree burns on her arms and hands. Lorraine had inhaled so much smoke she could barely speak. Betty had a gash on her forehead from falling debris. They were told to rest and return to work in 2 days. No thank you, no acknowledgement. Just go home. Then the newspapers arrived. The headline read, "Heroic Doctor Saves Hospital in Devastating Fire." The article praised Dr. Howard Preston for his bravery and quick thinking. It described how he had personally carried patients to safety and organized the evacuation. The mayor called him a hero. The hospital board gave him a medal. His photograph appeared on the front page, standing proudly in front of the burnt building. There was no mention of Ruth, no mention of Lorraine or Betty, no mention of the black nurses who had risked their lives while others fled. The truth had been rewritten before the smoke had even cleared. Ruth tried to speak up. She went to the hospital administration and told them what really happened. They listened politely, then told her to keep quiet. If she continued to cause trouble, she would lose her job. Lorraine and Betty were given the same warning. The black newspapers tried to report the real story, but they had limited circulation and were ignored by the mainstream press. Photographs from that night were altered. In some, Ruth was cropped out entirely. In others, her image was replaced with that of a white nurse. History was being erased in real time, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. Ruth went back to work. She continued nursing for 29 more years. She saved countless lives, trained younger black nurses, and fought quietly for workplace dignity. But she never received recognition for what she did that night. She never got an award, a ceremony, or even an apology. When she retired in 1970, there was no pension and no celebration. The hospital gave her a cheap clock and a handshake. That was it. Ruth Caldwell died in 1982 at the age of 67. Her obituary ran 3 lines in the local paper. It listed her as a retired nurse and gave her surviving family members. It did not mention that she was a hero. For decades, that's where the story ended. Ruth was buried, forgotten, her name erased from history. But the truth has a way of surviving, even when it's buried deep. In 2019, a historian researching segregated hospitals discovered Ruth's personal journal in an estate sale. In it, Ruth had written a detailed account of the fire, naming everyone who had helped and everyone who had lied. The journal also contained letters Ruth had written to civil rights organizations, pleading with them to tell the real story. None of them had responded. The historian kept digging. She found eyewitness testimonies from patients Ruth had saved. She found hospital records that had been altered, with names crossed out and replaced. She found photographs that had been cropped and edited. And slowly, piece by piece, she reconstructed the truth. Ruth Caldwell wasn't just a nurse. She was a hero who had been systematically erased because the color of her skin didn't fit the narrative that white America wanted to tell. The revelation sparked outrage. How could a hero be erased? How could her name be stolen? The hospital, now under different management, issued a public apology. They installed a memorial plaque in Ruth's honor, 76 years too late. But Ruth never knew. Her family never knew. She died believing that her courage didn't matter, that her life's work had been invisible. And here's the heartbreaking truth. Ruth's story isn't unique. There are thousands of black nurses, doctors, and healthcare workers whose contributions have been erased from history. Their names don't appear in textbooks. Their achievements aren't celebrated. They were the backbone of American medicine, working twice as hard for half the recognition, saving lives while being treated as less than human. How many others are still buried in unmarked archives, waiting for someone to care enough to uncover their stories? Ruth Caldwell saved more than 180 lives that night. But her impact goes far beyond one fire. Over her 29-year career, she cared for thousands of patients. She trained dozens of young black nurses, teaching them not just medicine, but resilience. She fought for fair wages and better working conditions, even when it put her job at risk. She showed up every single day in a system designed to break her, and she never stopped caring. That's heroism. Not just one night of courage, but a lifetime of it. Her name is Ruth Caldwell. Say it out loud. Remember it. Share it. Because the greatest injustice isn't just that her story was erased. It's that she died never knowing how many lives she touched, how many people she inspired, how much she mattered. She deserved to know. She deserved to be celebrated while she was alive. She deserved everything we're giving her now, but 76 years too late. This is why history matters. This is why we can't let these stories stay buried. Every time we uncover a name like Ruth's, we take back a piece of the truth. We correct the lies. We honor the people who deserved honor all along. Ruth Caldwell's name was erased, but now you know her story. Share this video. Let's make sure she's never forgotten again. Comment below. Who else deserves to have their story told? And subscribe, because next week we're uncovering another buried truth. Hit that notification bell. History belongs to all of us. Let's reclaim it together. For Ruth, for Lorraine, for Betty, for every invisible hero.